The fire had been out for 3 hours before Margaret Voss realized she was going to die on this mountain. She didn't panic. That surprised her. She'd always imagined that dying would feel like falling, that sharp, stomach-dropping sensation of something irreversible beginning. But sitting in the collapsed trapper's shelter, with the wind screaming through the gaps in the log wall and her youngest son, Thomas, pressed against her side, it felt more like settling, like snow finding its final shape. Thomas was 8 years old and running a fever that scared her more than the cold. The blizzard had come down from the Rockies without warning, the way catastrophic things always do, she'd learned, catching them 2 days from the nearest town, 1 day from the mine camp where her husband was supposed to meet them. Was supposed to. She stopped that thought before it finished. She had wood. She had matches. She had tried 11 times. The wood was too wet. But what Margaret didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that she was not alone on this mountain. Half a mile to the northeast, moving along the ridgeline with the particular patience of a man who has learned that panic burns energy he cannot afford to waste, a warrior named Stone Crow was also trying not to die. He had 3 broken ribs, a knife wound along his left side that had stopped bleeding only because the cold had slowed everything, and a decision that had been following him for 2 days like a second shadow. 6 days ago, Stone Crow had been part of a raid on a mining settlement 30 miles south. He hadn't wanted to be. That fact felt meaningless now, a child's excuse, but it had been true. The raid had gone wrong in the way things go wrong when desperate men make desperate plans. Someone had died who shouldn't have, a woman running for a doorway, and Stone Crow had pulled 2 men back before they could follow her inside the house. He didn't know her name. He didn't know if she had survived. He had been carrying that not knowing ever since. Keep moving, he told himself. The ridge drops east. East means lower elevation. Lower elevation means trees thick enough to block the wind. He was already below the ridge when he smelled the smoke, or what had been smoke, now just the ghost of it, cold and recent. He stopped. "Don't," said the voice in his head that had kept him alive for 34 years. He stood in the blizzard for a long moment. The wind made a sound like screaming. He turned toward the smell. Margaret heard the sound at the door and grabbed the hunting rifle before she was fully awake. She'd been half sleeping, her body making that animal calculation between rest and readiness. Thomas stirred against her but didn't wake. His skin was too hot under her palm. The door, what remained of it, one hinge broken, held by a leather strap, moved. She raised the rifle. The man who pushed through was not what she expected. She didn't know exactly what she'd expected. A bear, another collapsed section of roof, the mountain itself finally deciding to finish the job. Not a man. Not this man. The dark braids, the buckskin coat painted with frost, the careful way he held his hands away from his body as he stepped inside. Not a threat gesture. Something else. Showing me his hands, she realized. He's showing me he's not reaching for anything. "My son is sick," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "And I will shoot you before I let anything else happen to him today." The man looked at her, then at Thomas, then at the rifle. "Your wood is wet," he said. His English was accented but exact, like a man who had learned the language from someone who measured words carefully. "I can make your fire." She didn't lower the rifle. "Why?" It was not a stupid question. It was the only question. And something in his expression shifted. Not quite surprise, but something adjacent to it, as if he hadn't expected her to ask directly. "Because," he said slowly, "I'm also cold." She didn't trust him. That would be the wrong word for what happened next. What happened was, she kept the rifle across her knees while he built the fire, and he built it anyway. He found dry tinder under the collapsed section of the east wall where the roof had created a pocket of relative dryness. She hadn't thought to look there. His movements were economical. He didn't speak unless she asked him something. Thomas woke up when the fire caught and stared at the stranger with the wide, fever-bright eyes of a child who is too sick to be afraid. "Are you an Indian?" Thomas asked. "Thomas," Margaret started. "Yes," the man said simply. He was feeding the fire, small pieces, not yet the larger logs, patient, methodical. "My pa says Indians are dangerous," Thomas said. "Thomas, Your father is not entirely wrong, the man said, and something about the flatness of it, the refusal to offer comfort, made Margaret study him differently. What's your name? She asked. A pause. Stone Crow? I'm Mrs. Voss, Margaret. She hesitated. The boy is Thomas. He nodded once. He did not offer that it was good to meet them. The fire grew. The shelter, which had been a freezing tomb an hour ago, began to feel like a place where survival was at least theoretically possible. Thomas fell back asleep. Margaret finally set the rifle down, not away from her reach, but down. You're hurt, she said. She'd noticed the way he moved, the slight lockness on his left side. Yes. How bad? He considered the question with the same deliberateness he'd applied to the fire. Bad enough that I cannot travel far today. She understood what he was telling her. Neither can you. Neither can the boy. 3 people, 1 broken shelter, 1 blizzard that showed no signs of ending. Then I suppose, Margaret said quietly, we are stuck with each other. What she could not have known yet, what would change everything between them, was what she would find in his coat pocket 2 hours later. Thomas's fever climbed through the afternoon. She'd done everything she knew. Cool cloth on his forehead, the last of her willow bark tea, keeping him as still as possible. Stone Crow had said nothing, had sat at a careful distance from her and her son, tending the fire with the focus of a man who needed something to do with his hands. But when Thomas began to shake, the bad kind of shaking, the kind that meant the fever was fighting something hard, she said, I don't know what else to do, and she hadn't meant to say it aloud. Stone Crow was already moving. He went to his coat where it hung near the fire and reached into an inner pocket and brought out a small wrapped bundle. He unrolled it carefully. Dried plants, 3 different kinds, sorted by color. Yarrow and elderflower, he said, holding up 2 of them. For fever. You have a pot? She did. She watched him prepare it with the same precision he'd used for everything else. Exact amounts, specific sequence, crushing the yarrow between his palms before it went in. His hands, she noticed, were the hands of someone who had done careful work for a long time. There was a scar across the back of his left hand, old and settled. You know medicine, she said. My mother knew medicine. He didn't look up from the pot. She taught me what she could before. He stopped, added more quietly. She taught me. The unfinished sentence hung between them. Thomas drank the tea. Within an hour, the shaking had lessened. That was when she found the necklace. It had fallen from his coat when he'd replaced the medicine bundle, a small leather cord with a single carved wooden bead and a piece of blue cloth tied to it. She knew that cloth. She had made that cloth. It was from her daughter Clara's dress, the dress Clara had been wearing the day she disappeared from the doorway of their mining camp house while men were running and shouting outside 6 days ago. The world narrowed to a point. Margaret picked up the rifle. She could have pulled the trigger. Any jury in Colorado Territory would have acquitted her before the echo finished. Stone Crow turned when he heard her stand. He saw the rifle. He saw what she was holding in her other hand, and something passed across his face. Not fear, she realized. Recognition. The specific recognition of a man who has been waiting for a reckoning. Where is my daughter? Her voice was someone else's voice, low and strange and absolute. She is alive, he said it immediately, not a hesitation. She's with a family at the Ute trading post 2 days south. She was frightened. I left her with people who would keep her safe. He paused. I am the one who pulled her away from the men who would have... He stopped again. She is alive. She has a blue coat now. The woman there gave it to her. Margaret's hands were shaking. The rifle was shaking. The entire shelter seemed to shake. Why should I believe you? Because if I wanted to lie to you, he said quietly, I would not have sat here all afternoon saving your son's life. The fire crackled. Thomas breathed in his sleep, slower now, more even. Outside, the blizzard shrieked against the walls. She stood there for a long time. She did not lower the rifle, but she did not pull the trigger. When this storm breaks, she said finally, each word separate and deliberate, you are going to take me to my daughter. Yes, he said. And then we are done. A pause. Yes. She sat back down. She kept the rifle across her knees. They did not speak for a long time. But when the fire began to die down around midnight, it was Margaret who got up and fed it more wood. And when she did, she also set a cup of water within Stone Crow's reach without looking at him, because she had noticed him not asking for water for 6 hours, and that was the kind of stubbornness she recognized. He said nothing, but he drank it. The storm broke on the third morning. In those 2 days, they had not become friends. They had not forgiven each other for the complex calculus of who owed what to whom. But they had somehow, without planning to, become people who had kept each other alive. And that is its own kind of bond, different from friendship, more durable than most. Thomas had recovered enough to walk slowly. Stone Crow moved like a man with broken ribs, which was to say, carefully, without complaint, and slower than he wanted to. They traveled south. Stone Crow led. Margaret followed with Thomas. She kept her rifle. On the second day of travel, Thomas, who had the relentless curiosity of all 8-year-olds, asked Stone Crow why he had joined the raid if he hadn't wanted to. Margaret almost said, "Thomas, don't." She didn't. Stone Crow walked several steps in silence. Then, "My brother asked me to come. He thought I would keep things from going wrong." A long pause. He was not entirely mistaken, but not entirely right either. "What happened to your brother?" Thomas asked. "He was killed in the raid." Another pause. "By one of his own men when things went wrong." Thomas seemed to process this. "So you lost your brother?" "Yes. We lost my sister. For a while." Thomas looked up at the warrior. "That's sad. Both of those things are sad." "Yes," Stone Crow said. "They are." It was, Margaret would think later, the most honest conversation she had witnessed in years. The trading post appeared out of the tree line on the 4th day of their descent, and Clara was standing in the yard. She was wearing a blue coat. She was alive. She ran. Margaret caught her daughter and held her until holding her wasn't enough, and she had to hold her more, and Thomas crashed into both of them, and for a long moment there was nothing in the world except the three of them and the cold air and the fact that they were all still here. When Margaret finally looked up, Stone Crow was standing at the edge of the tree line. He had stopped 20 feet from the trading post. He was watching them with an expression she couldn't fully read, something between relief and the particular loneliness of a man who has delivered something precious to its rightful place and now has nothing left in his hands. She walked toward him. She stopped 6 feet away. "You should come inside," she said. "Your ribs need to be properly wrapped. The trader's wife knows medicine." He looked at her. "I'm not forgiving you," she said clearly. "I want you to understand that. I'm not saying it's even. I'm not saying it's resolved. There are things between what happened and what is that I don't know how to cross yet." He nodded once. "But you kept my son alive," she said, "and you brought me back to my daughter. And you are standing in a cold field with broken ribs because you thought you didn't deserve to come any closer." She met his eyes. "Come inside." Another long pause. "Thank you," he said. The 2 words came out as if he wasn't entirely sure he was allowed to say them. "Don't thank me yet," Margaret said. "Clara is going to have questions." For the first time, the only time she would ever see it, something that might have been the edge of a smile crossed Stone Crow's face. They walked toward the trading post together, the warrior and the widow, and the winter light coming thin and cold through the pines, and behind them the mountain stood enormous and indifferent, keeping none of its secrets. If this story reached something in you, leave a like. It costs nothing and means everything to this channel. Tell me in the comments, was Margaret right to let him come inside? What would you have done? Epilogue, 4 years later. The letter came to Margaret Voss in the spring of 1877, addressed in careful English handwriting she had seen only once before on a trading post ledger she'd asked Stone Crow to help her read. Mrs. Voss, I am told your claim has prospered. I'm glad of it. The people I travel with have moved north. I think of Thomas sometimes, his question on the trail. Both of those things are sad. Yes, they are. I wanted you to know that I think of it as the truest thing anyone said to me in a long time. I hope Clara has grown strong. I hope you have all grown strong. S.C. She read it twice. She folded it and put it in the small wooden box where she kept things she intended to keep. Thomas, now 12 and already his father's height, came in from the yard and saw her at the table. "Who's the letter from?" She thought about how to answer that. "Someone," she said finally, "who was on the mountain with us." Thomas was quiet for a moment. He remembered the mountain. He remembered the fire and the tea and the conversation in the snow. "Is he okay?" Thomas asked. Margaret looked at the letter in her hands. "I think," she said, "he is trying to be." Thomas nodded, in the way that 12-year-olds nod when they understand something they can't quite put words to yet. Outside, the spring was coming into the valley, green and slow and indifferent, the way good things usually come. And Margaret Voss sat at her table in the light and thought about mountains and storms and the strange, unasked-for bonds that form when survival strips everything else away. She did not forgive Stone Crow that day. She had not forgiven him yet. But she kept the letter, and that, perhaps, was where it began.